really good. Here it is. This is an homage to Gerard Manley Hopkins. Does anyone know who Gerard Manley Hopkins is? Good, neither did I. Passing through customs was a fast and pleasant experience. Not at all what I had anticipated. This was, after all, the capital of a land still reverberating from the shockwave of revolution. And my country, though maintaining relations in a formal sense, was spoken of only in the most hostile terms. Its citizens no longer clung blindly to the rail of oblivion without resistance. Led by that banished dictator who deposited so many, by his own hand, or through those of his agents, into the abyss. Their eyes seemed wide open now. They embraced the Revolutionary Council as true brothers of their salvation. The expectations were few and holed up, the exceptions were few and holed up in the hills near the border. Their only source of weapons and indeed of clothing and food came from the covert aid of my own country. So visitors such as myself are viewed at best as intruders and more likely as outright enemies, or anemones. I wondered then why I was passed through the customs line with no search of my baggage and a few perfunctory questions. I had had much more difficulty in crossing the border into Canada last winter when I was made to remove the spare tire from the trunk of my car so that the inspectors might search amongst the oily rags and check the insulation of the lining of the tire ice chest. It was true. I was there as a guest of the government office. At the invitation of the Committee for Cultural Events, I am a writer and translator. I hold an esteemed post in the comparative literature department of most prestigious university. Still, I was taken back by the remarkable efficiency of the finely dressed men, 3 no less, who greeted me immediately upon retrieving my baggage. They guided me quickly to a car whose engine was already open. No sooner had I touched my body to the spacious back seat than we were weaving throughout cross-hatch traffic whose cars always seem smaller in foreign places. Looking closer through the open window, however, I realized these were, after all, quite different from any autos I had seen at home or in my many years of travel. Picking up on my curiosity, one of the agents who was facing me from a jump seat explained how all imports had been banned within the last 3 months as far as the automobile industry was concerned. But of course, you would know about all such affairs, he whispered enigmatically, his face contorted without any apparent effort into what was literally a half smile and half sneer, each side opposing each other like a composite photograph. I replied, puzzled and somewhat anxious that I had no idea what he meant, then hastened to loosen up the atmosphere of those close quarters, which seemed to be growing closer still, by commenting how amazing the cars looked and what a genuine feat it must have been to produce them. I fell short of expressing my considered opinion of just how terribly ugly these cars were. There were, from what I had seen, 2 uniform models, which did, in their defense, offer exactly twice the variety of Hitler's vision for a vehicle to transport citizens of the fatherland. Both models were hideous. One looked like a shoe, the other was larger, shaped in almost the exact proportions of a coffin. Each had wheels, smaller in circumference and width than that of a standard motorcycle, which seemed, right there, to be a failing proposition, even to the layman's eyes. From the sounds which enclosed us on either side, it was obvious nobody around the drawing board had considered including mufflers in the design. The sound was deafening. The highway more like a lake during one of those races for those cigar-shaped, monstrous powerboats. Our own vehicle, I suddenly realized, was more like a sailboat, icily quiet, a leftover import from the old days of the new regime, or, more likely, the early days of the old regime. It was, in fact, an old British Daimler, very much in mint operating condition. Why did I rate an anomaly? The cultural people seemed to put a higher estimate on my work than I myself did, even in the wildest frenzy of ego beneath the halfway point of a fifth of scotch. I looked closer at my companions. It was a questioning stare that went unanswered. None of them looked at all Latino in feature. They all looked quite the same. The car, I noticed, was getting cold. Not cool, but cold. My companions' breathing grew visible. I was breathing too thinly to give off a sign. Things began to happen quickly then. Both back windows came up at once, powered by a remote up front. It must have been installed specifically. These cars predated such devices. The windows were darkly tinted. I could see nothing from them but the reflections of others and myself. And so the space grew thinner. That's when the fellow opposite me with the same clashing expression began to speak. The others moved in tighter and leaned forward. The 3 tracks of icy breath met and mingled between them, a single small cloud which rose the ceiling and dissolved. Sir, he asked in the same whispering tone, are you familiar with the works of a poet of your own language, a poet by the name of Gerard Manley Hopkins? Yes, of course, I answered, amazed at the question. A fine poet, and a favorite of mine in my undergraduate days. He was a priest, you know. Oh, but indeed I do know. The man, his menace growing, replied, "And I am grateful for your candor in this matter." I had no idea what he was getting at. My candor about what? Something else. His accent was shifting. He had spoken so little I hadn't noticed at first a false note in his Latino phrasings in English. Now he seemed to have lapsed into a more Eastern European tone, that methodical, Slavic slurring, words punctuated with short, clipped declaratives. Outside the car, the unmuffled engines had ceased, and I could feel that the texture of road beneath us had changed from asphalt to dirt. We were obviously outside the city, heading deeper into the countryside. Suddenly, there was a thud-like sound, and the driver slammed on his brakes. One man got out, while the other two seemed to slide in what they considered to be strategic positions. They moved as casually and calmly as two who had drilled such moves many times. No more than half a minute passed before the third man had returned. He explained that we had hit an animal, and we began to move on. He did not elaborate. He did not say what kind of animal, nor did he mention if it was killed or still alive. Did Hopkins write poems about animals? I was asked by the same man as before. I'm afraid I don't know. I hesitated. I don't believe he did, he went on, and I would know. I spent the last 2 months reading all of his works. I've read them in 3 different languages. I've also read all available biographical material. He was not born Catholic, but converted and 10 years later was ordained. I think he preferred trees to animals as far as subjects of his poems. Trees and his God. What a wonderful way of blending the formal with the colloquial. I blurted back, hardly believing I had said it. I was shaking visibly now, not only from the increasing cold within the car, but from a deep anxiety with the realization that these men were neither from the ministry nor for culture, nor, for that matter, from the country we were in. "You seem to be shaking, sir," he cooed, draping a blanket, which was thin enough to be totally without use, around me. "And may I say, that was an astute comment." "What?" "What you said about Hopkins, the formal language blended with..." "It was hardly astute," I interrupted. "And may I ask you, what the hell is going..." "Ah, as the heart grows older," he recited, "it will come such sights colder, by and by, nor spare a sigh, and yet you will weep, and you will know why." I stared at him directly. His composure was becoming comical. I was still afraid, yet found myself angry enough to say exactly what I was thinking. "Your game is becoming ludicrous. I refuse to be part of it. You are obviously some sort of agents from another government. I have no idea what you want from me, but..." "My recitation, sir." He cut me off once more. "Have you no comment to make? Please indulge me, for it seems it is more likely you who is playing the game." "I truly don't know what you mean. As for the poem, you added an extra word in the last line. There is only one will. The second one was your own contribution. Also, you left out an entire line, the one next to the last. It goes, 'The worlds of Waynwood leave me a lie.' Are you satisfied? Is your idiot inquiry finished? Will I be handed a grain?" He said nothing, but knocked on the glass partition twice. The driver deftly spun the car about, and we were again heading back towards the city. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir," he finally spoke, this time in another accent, decidedly British. "But you know we had to be certain. I'm sure you understand, though you played the role with amazing conviction. Certainly much better than our rather melodramatic East Block routine. Now, here's the envelope containing the documents. Your plane tickets are included as well. We'll be returning you to the hotel at the airport now. You'll need sleep. Your flight leaves early." The contorted face had relaxed into something else. He was still quite an unattractive man, and I was glad to be rid of him and his companions when they dropped me at the hotel. I burned the envelope without opening it, flushing the ashes down the toilet, then I slept. I never contacted anyone from the Ministry of Culture and flew out the next morning. Glad to miss the conference. One would think... One would think that such a strange experience would deeply affect my life. It has not. I've forgotten it, in any real sense, that is. I will offer one piece of advice, however. Never learn too well the works of a poet, for somehow the works of the masters have infiltrated the systems of those who are dangerous and covert. They have turned lines of beauty and love into codes of identification. Security is maintained in the detection of a flawed meter, and messages of coercion and betrayal are delivered on iambics.